3617, respond to report of shots fired.
The Coroner Talk podcast takes you behind the scenes with coroners, clinicians, and death investigators from around the world to provide training, news, and interviews from leading experts in the area of death investigation and scene management, bringing real stories and solid training together in one source. Now, here's your host, Darren Dake.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Coroner Talk. Again, I am so glad that you joined me again this week. I know we had a little bit of time off in the summer. It's going to go into the fall, and then it kind of got into the winter before we started back again. So some of our downloads and some of our listenership is starting to come back up. And for those of you that are back on the show weekly, I very much appreciate that. If you know somebody that was listening and then took it out of their queue because they thought that I was dead and was never coming back, tell them to put it back in their queue because we are back and we're going to maintain it now at all possible cost, I hope. So we're gonna try to maintain. We've been podcasting this show since 2014. So there just are times in life that we have to change things around, and COVID actually caused some of those problems. But we are back. I think we're back stronger than ever. And as you've been hearing, we've got Wendy on, which has been a great value to our show. And so for those of you who are getting to know her quite a bit, and that's fantastic. Again, before we get started, I just want to remind you of training like I do all the time. That's my heart. I know sometimes you say, people's like, "Would you quit talking about training?" Well, that's actually what this podcast is about. It's about training. And so, of course, we have online courses, we have in-person classes. That's my heart. I've got two passions outside of my wife and kids. My two passions are death investigation and training about death investigation. And of course, God is at the top of all of it, but after family, then training and death investigation. So you're going to hear me talk about that a lot. I can't help it. That is who I am. And those of you that's been around since 2014 know that I'm opinionated, and I'll tell you who I am, whether you want to know or not. So again, if you have training that you want me to bring to your place, if you want me to come to you, I certainly can do that. All you have to do is ask, and we can work it out. And in most cases, it costs your agency nothing. And you get free seats because we just enroll students from around your area. And so you can have basically free training, and we can have a group session. So if you are interested in that, please let me know. I want to go everywhere that I can in 2022. Of course, my goal is still Australia. I still want to go to Australia. I thought I had that going on until COVID locked the world down. So if you are in Australia or you have a connection to Australia and you can somehow get me there, please do so. My number 2 place is South Korea. South Korea came here to Missouri, and I loved meeting the people from South Korea. We had a great time, and I want to go back there. So once things start opening back up, if you've got connection to South Korea, then bring me down there. And we will have a great time and some great training. So with that said, let's kind of move on to our show. All right, so today we're going to talk about the evolution and challenges in next of kin notification in a transient society. Boy, you say that 4 times fast, right? So, in where we're at right now, we are very transient, and so we have a lot of problems with next of kin notification. So, Wendy, welcome to the show. Wendy, of course, is there in the quote green room, and she's ready to roll.
It's an honor to be back, Darren.
Oh, now you're just becoming part of the woodwork. So you're just part of the show. So evolution and challenges in next of kin, in notifying next of kin in a transient society. Well, now that was your title. You came up with that title. So kind of give us a launching pad as to what you mean and what we're going to kind of discuss in this show.
Well, our society is becoming more and more transient. People are moving around I'm going to say the old days, but people used to stay in one place all their lives or most of their lives. They really didn't move around a lot. And as time has gone on, we've become more transient and moving around and going to different places, living in various places for shorter periods of time. And with the advent of cell phones, we can take our phone numbers with us. So wherever you got your cell phone from, like if I got my cell phone here in Colorado way back when, and I don't want to change my phone number, and most people don't, it's amazing how many people are married to their phone number. Number one, because it's a pain to try to get your new phone number out to everybody that you know. But people go from state to state, they take their old phone number with them. And where it used to be when I would try to contact or locate next of kin for somebody, you look at the area code of that number and then try to narrow it down to, okay, this is that person's address. And then I can notify law enforcement in that area to go help me with doing a death notification. Now, with everybody taking their phone numbers with them, you can't do that. It's not as easy to do that anymore.
Yeah, and sometimes the phone numbers, they may say from a different area, but like my phone number I've had since 2006 or 7, something like that, and it shows the number originated from someplace that's 2 hours from me. Now, since then, we have numbers that's associated with my area. So in my particular area, 259, we have 573 area code, and then 259, 241, 205. That's kind of my area. But back then, they didn't have those. And so the phone number they gave me was to a town that was over 2 hours away. So if you was to take my number and look for family in that area, I have no family in that area. That's 2 hours the wrong direction. So that could be certainly a problem. And I've had that number, like you said. I say that I'm married to it. I've had that number forever. So anybody that I've ever given that number to that's still on their contact list, it's just there. Mm-hmm. And I do not want to change my number because it causes all kinds of problems trying to stay in connection with people you want to stay in connection with. And then I just block people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're in a tourist area, right? So you have issues specifically about having people up there, not just transient, but on vacation, let's say, okay?
Right, right.
So what challenges have you seen in trying to find a next of kin? Again, certainly because they're tourists in your area, and they could be from anywhere in the world.
Right, right. And now everybody keeps their contact information on their cell phones, and their cell phones oftentimes are locked. So we have a hard time getting into the cell phone to find next of kin. People have kind of gotten away from keeping like an address book or something like that. Again, going back to the old days, I'm dating myself. People even carried like little address books in their purses or in their wallet. They had a list of people that they often had contact with. People don't do that anymore. They keep their contacts in their phone. And so and even when I go to a scene of somebody that lives here, it's harder to find that information because they're keeping it on their computers or on their cell phones, and we can't get access to that information. Whereas before, we would go in and look for mail or their address book to find next of kin, and it would have an address that we could hopefully go to that person's house or have somebody go in person and contact them. And now we don't have that anymore.
Right. And on iPhones, and I don't know about anything else other than iPhones, but depending on what model you have, but if like I think they're all about the same. If you hold down the the button to shut the screen on and off and the volume. So if you hold that down, you can hold that down long enough to reset it, right? But when you hold that down, then you generally have a choices of like turn off or SOS call or emergency information. And us as investigators, we have access to that. So if we swipe over the emergency, it's going to tell about me, about my blood type, and then it goes on to finding in case of emergencies. And so iPhones, if someone has taken the time to set that up, then that's there. Now, I'm sure that Androids and stuff have it as well in some way. But iPhone, trying to open a phone sometimes will be difficult. Now with facial recognition, I have warmed up thumbs and opened it with a thumb, but now facial recognition makes it tough.
I've done that too.
Yeah. Although if you have not duct tape, but Scotch tape, if you have Scotch tape, you can hold the eyes open with Scotch tape and generally get it to open up. But if you put your fingers on there and try to hold the eyelids open, facial recognition won't
Right.
necessarily work. So you got to use invisible tape. No, anecdotally, of course,
Yeah.
No, we've had to do that.
Anecdotally.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
we've had to do that. But for instance, I think last week, we were talking about the person they unidentified we found in the creek. Well, again, that was an issue of identified by tattoos. Remember, we was talking about that on social media. Well, luckily, someone here local recognized that tattoo, but that would be a really big issue trying to notify next of kin when this person, we had no idea who this person was, and what information we found out, luckily, the next of kin, though, he was actually from a prison from Missouri, but he's in prison in Texas. Well, had we not had the information of the tattoo, the person recognized it, notifying next of kin could have been near impossible.
Yeah. And it's hard with people moving around and trying to find where do they live, because most of the time I've found anymore, people don't live where it's recorded that they live. They've moved and they don't change their address, and it may not even be changed in the contact list of the person that's died. That may not have changed. It may be something different. And I actually had an issue with that for a death notification a couple months ago. I was told that this guy's mother, who was the next of kin, had moved from one state to another state. And I went online, looked up her name and some addresses, found an address, come to find out that was her parents' address. It wasn't her address. And she was in another state at an airport getting ready to fly home. And the police went to the door, knocked on the door of this guy's grandparents, and said, "Hey, your son just died." And they're like, "We don't have a son." So that can present some problems too.
Yes. But at least there was once there was some confusion resolved, there was a family connection in some way there.
Right. Yeah, there was.
Right.
But yeah.
But it isn't always that way. We had a gentleman the other day that died. His friend found him, and talking to the friend about next of kin, he goes, "Well, he has some, I guess, but he has a daughter that was put up for adoption when she was a baby, but of course that's gone. He has an ex-wife that he has no idea where she's at and hadn't spoke to in years that I know of. And he said he has a brother and a sister, but both of them all hate each other, and I don't even know how to contact them. So I don't know what to do about next of kin. So we searched around and tried to find phone numbers, and we got the guy's cell phone, which was not locked. And so we were able to get some phone numbers out of there, some names and phone numbers out of the cell phone. And, we hate doing notification on the phone, but we didn't as of yet. We got those in case we had to start calling and say, "Hey, do you know so-and-so?" Yes. And if so, do you know any next of kin, or are you next of kin? But before we had to do that, we asked a friend, "Can you know him better than us, and you know some contact? Can you snoop around and see if you can find a next of kin, a sister?" And he did. The next day, he called and says, "Okay, I did get in touch with the sister. I dug around his house because he had keys to the man's house, and he had full access to the house." And he said, "So I dug around and found a phone number to what I believe was a sister, and I called her. I've told her that he has died, and here's who she is, and whatever." So long story short, we did finally make notification, and what we thought happened. Sister and brother both said, "We want nothing to do with it. Do with him as you please. Thank you for letting us know, but goodbye." So
yeah, we run into that actually quite a bit up here. We had a gentleman die this past summer, and he was estranged from everybody. He didn't have any next of kin left. He had an ex-wife, I believe, and he had written his sister out of his will, and she was the only next of kin that was left. And because he had written her out of his will, she didn't want anything to do with him, didn't care what we did with his body. He had a substantial estate, and she didn't want anything to do with him. So then it's like, then what do? We don't have next of kin that's going to claim him. The power of attorney was the bank. The bank was like, well, we don't deal with bodies. It's like, well, he can't hang out here forever. We got to do something.
That can be very tough. Especially not only in finding them. Let's say you find somebody that's in some way a next of kin. A lot of states have the right of sepulcher, which basically means you have the right and the responsibility. No, I'm sorry, not responsibility. You have the right to take charge of your loved one's body and dispose of as you wish to. Cremation, burial, or nothing at all. Right of sepulcher. The thing is, some states have a right of sepulcher in an echelon. Who is the primary next of kin all the way down to the least important next of kin? Some states require you to go in order. Some states say, pick one on the list. As long as you pick one, you're good.
Right.
But it's our job, I think, regardless of what the state law is, I think it's our job to try to notify the highest next of kin on that sepulcher list. Now, in some cases, it could be an attorney that's been designated as the power of attorney, next of kin. But if the person's married, it's their spouse. If they're married, if they have adult children, it's the oldest adult child. If they have no adult children, then it's the oldest minor child. As long as the minor child has a guardian of some sort that's not the deceased, then the guardian then can act on behalf of that child, and it goes on and on and on. Like eventually it gets down to an ex-wife or an ex-spouse. It could be what we call in Missouri a next friend, which means, yeah, I know Joe, I'll take care of it. We're bar buddies. It can get all the way down to that, and if Joe at the bar decides to go ahead and take care of it when no one else can be located, then that's legal. But here's the challenge. Just like you said, we live in a transient society. We never know where people are going to be, and it's hard to locate them sometimes. But we have a responsibility, and a legal responsibility as coroners, to notify the correct next of kin, or for sure, make proper documentation that we've tried.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. And that's the key right there, Darren, is you need to document what steps have you taken to notify the legal next of kin?
Yes.
And because they may show up years later and say, well, why didn't you notify me? And you can pull that documentation and show them, this is what we attempted to do to try to notify you, to locate next of kin and get you notified.
Right. So do you know what's the echelon in Colorado? Pretty well exactly like I described from Missouri?
Yeah. It's starts with a spouse, and then parents, and then oldest child, living child, and then it kind of goes downhill from there. And it's like whoever you can find that will take responsibility, aunts, uncles, cousins. I had a case of, I can't remember the name of there's a famous saxophone player for a big band, and the guy's nephew died, or his son died, and there was no next of kin. It got down to a cousin that had to take responsibility for his body, and it was from a drug overdose.
Well, and there's a difference between notification of a next of kin and who's going to take responsibility, because we can't force someone to take responsibility, right? We can't force them.
No.
So maybe we have to notify the guy. I'm using a guy example. A guy's divorced. He has no children that we can find, and we notify his mother. The mother, who's also estranged from him, says, thank you for notifying me, but I want nothing to do with it. Or an adult sibling, or whatever. Well, you've notified the highest next of kin that you was able to locate, If they refuse to accept responsibility, you can't. That's fine. You can't make them. So then it goes to again all the way down to if somebody else wants to take responsibility, we're allowed to do that. The cautionary tale here is whoever's paying the bill is pretty much who the funeral home listens to. But on our end, we need to have notified the highest person on the hierarchy that we can. Even if they say go pound sand, we can say we've attempted to go up that chain. So what I'm saying is, don't just find the first cousin that lives down the street and say, okay, I'm done. Like in Missouri, we can do that. That's legal. We've notified a next of kin. It's up to y'all to talk to amongst each other. But that's not proper. So what's proper is to say, okay, that's the cousin. Hey, cousin, does he have any spouses, parents, living children? And if the cousin can't give us any information or we can't find it in any other records, well, then we're done. But we, like you said, we have to document that, because even if it isn't a liability, which it could be, we could get sued, but even if it doesn't end up being a lawsuit, it can cause major embarrassment for the county, and it's just not the right way to do it, really.
Right. And we've run into quite a bit, again, because we are a tourist-oriented community, that somebody dies and this person's friends are with them. We have to rely on the friends. For instance, yesterday, I had a skier death. All his buddies are with him skiing. And it's like, okay, who is his next of kin? Where does he have a spouse or his parents? And how do we contact them? And so sometimes we have to notify the friends first and say, this is what happened to your friend. And how can we get in contact with his legal next of kin? Right.
Which you've made the notification to the people at the scene, or what you can find first,
Right.
And being transient, not in a society, not only for the decedent, but even the next of kin, can also cause problems when it comes to, there's one out there, there's an adult child, but then how do you find them? I mean, we talked about on the show, we've talked about using Clear before. That's access to law enforcement, and putting, nexus together of known associates and family. But it's not always cut and dry of trying to find, there's an adult son out there somewhere. How do we find it?
Right.
It's not always easy. Have you run into some ways to find this son somewhere in America?
It's just talking to friends, other family members that will talk to us, and going back and using that Clear program. That really helps quite a bit. And going on to social media, if they've got a social media account, trying to find that, trying to get access to their phone or their computer to see what they have as well. It's kind of like trying to find a needle in a haystack sometimes, though.
Yeah, true. So what policy do you guys have how long do you hold somebody, number one, to locate a next of kin, but number two, once you notify a next of kin, then how much longer do you hold the body to continue searching for the highest hierarchy you can find?
We really don't have a policy on that. We don't have really a policy on that. We just do what we can, but we have very limited storage space. Our morgue only has 3 drawers to it. And lately we've been getting really full, and we're like, okay, now where are we going to put them? Out in a snowbank?
Well, actually, at 9,000 feet in Colorado, you could do that and probably be okay. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, we don't do that. But so then we have to decide, are we going to bury this person in like a pauper's grave in our cemetery until we can locate next of kin? Do we take them down to a facility down in the metro area that has a bigger cooler that we have an agreement with, that we can store them there temporarily until we can locate next of kin? We just have to get creative with what we do and try to diligently get the highest next of kin notified, located and notified as quickly as we can.
Right. And we're the same way. We try to get notified. So let's say we notify somebody that's a second cousin, right? And he's given us some ideas of how to get a hold of the hierarchy, and we cannot get a hold of somebody higher than them. We may hold for a few days. And at some point, then, if the cousin was willing to take responsibility financially, then we release to whatever funeral home the cousin says so, and we document everything we tried to do. However, if we can't find anybody, we normally hold for a week to 10 days, and I say or because it kind of depends on the case. If we have diligently tried solid for a week to 10 days, and we got 2 or 3 of us really searching and doing things and asking questions and running databases down and things like that, and we cannot find a next of kin, then we cremate. We don't bury the body. We cremate and then hold the cremains for a year. And then after that, we have a ceremony and bury any cremains that we have in the county's, unknown, or not necessarily known, pauper cemetery type thing that was donated to
right.
us. Now, in the new facility, which we are in the process of building, it will be a little better. We won't have to necessarily be that week long. The reason it's a week is because we're limited storage as well. We've got more storage than you, but we're still limited. And also, even under conditions of being in the cooler, decomposition may slow, but it can continue.
Mm-hmm.
And
right,
there's also odor there. So in a new facility, we're going to have a 2-drawer freezer. So if we have a certain known decomp, or if we have just an unknown, and we've left them in the cooler for 10 days, and we absolutely can't find anybody, theoretically, we could move them over to because autopsy and stuff would be done if we're going to have one. We could move them over to a freezer and freeze the body, and then we could leave them there for another 6 months if we wanted to. I mean, not that we probably would. I don't know where our policy is going to be there. The point is, it stops the decomposition process, and it allows us to take more time. Part of the reason why we're having to do that, you and I and many others, is because storage. We just don't have the room to store them,
right.
And leaving them at cooler temperature can still be, even though it's, if we can keep them down to 34, then that's almost as good. But still, frozen at 20 or 0 is a lot
right.
better. And and then there would still be, maybe if it's 2 months, 3 months later, there's still possibilities that the family could do something once the body is thawed and maybe have some embalming issues. So I don't know. It just that's going to happen in a new facility, but it's tough. I mean, we have big tourist area in our county as well, and we have drowning victims that all we have are friends, and the friends might know a mom, they may not. They college friends or whatever, work friends coming down from Illinois to have a camp trip and a float, but they don't know anything about him. He's a guy at work. I don't think he's not married that I know of, but otherwise I don't know anything about him. So those friends sometimes aren't helpful either. Yeah.
And it amazes me how many people can live with somebody and say, yeah, we've been best friends for 2 years, or I've known this guy and we hang out and drink beer all the time. And then you ask them, well, what's their last name? I don't know. Okay, how can you be good friends with somebody and not know even their last name, much less anything else about them? That blows my mind.
But it's common. It's very common.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I didn't know if that was just an occurrence up here with all the ski bums that come up here and hang out and smoke their weed and go skiing.
On the tourist side, it is very common. As far as our residents or people who stay here long term, generally roommates know. But our tourist side, it's very common because, again, we had one sometime this summer, kind of the same thing. He ended up swimming and, the alcohol took over and he ended up drowning. And he said the same thing. I don't know his last name. He was a friend of somebody else who didn't. So this guy was supposed to come with another guy. And the other guy backed out at the last minute, but this guy went ahead and went. He said, so he's like, we know him. He's been around to some events, but he's really not our friend per se. He's Billy Bob's friend. But Billy Bob got sick and didn't come, but this guy came anyway, which is fine with us. We had a good time, but we don't know anything about him. We don't know his name. We don't know anything about him because he's not our direct connection. Well, so then, of course, we had to get the name of Billy Bob and call Billy Bob, and he knew a little bit more, but not as much as you think he should, but he knew some more. But at the scene, they're like, we don't know. We just know his first name.
Yeah.
Just like you said, even though they have been on other events together, I mean, a last name is not necessarily all that secretive. I mean, why would you not know somebody's last name?
No. Yeah. It just amazes me. But and it's makes things more difficult when you're trying to locate next of kin and you don't have any other resource like their cell phone or something that can give you a last name. And then, but even then, if you've got something, you've got a phone number of next of kin, but you don't know where they live, then it's like, okay, so how, and you have a positive ID, then how am I going to notify the next of kin without traumatizing them? Because I really, really preferred having an in-person notification done if I can get it done.
Yes.
But it seems like it's becoming more and more common, unfortunately, that I have had to do on the phone notifications. And you have to be really careful doing that.
Yeah, and here's another problem with some of these out of jurisdiction notifications. I've gotten a rash of this recently. And it's not just one jurisdiction. I've contacted jurisdiction, their dispatch center, excuse me, and said, we've got a death that occurred in our county, and we believe the next of kin lives in your jurisdiction. Here's the address. Can you have somebody come by and make notification? And so Wells said, well, let me let the officer call you, the road sergeant call you, whatever, get the information. Okay, fine. So the officer calls back. I said, okay, here's the deal. Here's the person. Here it is. I just need to verify that this is his parents. And if it is, would you please notify him that he's been killed in a car accident and that, we need to talk to them about some next steps and things like that. Okay, got it. I cannot tell you how many times over the last couple of years now I've gotten somebody call me and saying, yeah, this is so-and-so, and the police were here and told me to give you a call. Okay. Do you know why you're calling? No, I have no idea why I'm calling. Well, what do you mean you have no idea why you're calling? What? So what they've done, they went in there and said, hey, you need to call the sheriff's office. You need to call the coroner's office. They did tell you something. Well, that's not in-person notification.
No.
That's terrible. No.
And it's, yeah. And that just comes down to, there's a lot of officers, they are very uncomfortable with doing a death notification. They haven't been trained how to do it, or they just don't want to do it because it's something that's uncomfortable for them. So they're like, oh, here's a name and phone number you need to call.
Yes.
And yeah, I've had that a lot. They'll call and say, I was told to give you a call. And you're like, do you know why you're supposed to be calling me? No. And then it gets really uncomfortable for me because then I have to notify them. And so then I try to take precautions and ask them, is there somebody there with you? I'm afraid I have some bad news to tell you. And I just want to make sure that you're in a safe place and make sure they're not driving or in a public place and make sure that there's somebody there. Because I have actually had somebody have a heart attack on the other end of the phone line when I told them that their loved one had died.
Oh my.
Yeah. And so fortunately there was somebody else there so they could call EMS, and they grabbed the phone and said, hey, they're having a heart attack now, so we'll call you back.
Man, that would be
that was a long time ago, but
yes. Well,
yeah.
And the thing is, it's becoming more, again, we're talking about transient notification in this transient society. It's becoming more and more popular for people not to be living in the same area and things. And so these phone notifications, unfortunately, are happening. I totally disagree with phone notifications. I don't want to do them, but sometimes we're stuck doing it. Like that example where where you and I are thrown into this, or we have no other choice. We don't have a police agency in the area that's able to, or they're busy, or just want whatever. There's reasons why sometimes we have to. But then you got the issue of trying to determine if it's not the right. I was getting ready to say right next of kin. I don't mean the right next of kin on the hierarchy, but that they're even a next of kin at all.
Right. Right.
They may not be.
Right.
You may think they are, but they may not be a next of kin. And I've had that happen where someone said, "Oh yeah, well here's his." This was a nephew. We couldn't find anybody. And someone said, well, his nephew is so-and-so, and he lives over in this other town. I said, okay, well, we've done some research, and we found the nephew that lived over in this other town. And so we had the police go by and notify him that his uncle had died, and he was found dead, unresponsive in his home, and that he needed to call our office, and da-da-da. So he did, and so we're talking to him and getting the information from him and things like that. And all that was fine and dandy, but guess what? It's not his uncle. Never was his uncle.
Oh man!
But he hung around, and he would finally, he would call him Uncle Dave, or I don't even remember the guy's name. Dave, Hey, Uncle Dave, but he really wasn't a legal uncle. He basically was just an older friend that he had met,
right?
And they've just, they were probably like 30 years apart in age. So everybody around thought, oh, yeah, that's his nephew. Well, it wasn't. They were really just, they had that relationship kind of, but not legal. So
right.
That's fine. We found that out eventually. But then we're like, okay, so you're not really related by marriage, blood, nothing. No, we've just known each other since I was a kid, and I've always called him Uncle Dave. And no, we're probably friends, you might call, but I kind of thought of him as my uncle. I said, okay, do you know any of his family? No. Have you ever met any of them? No. So we're back to square one.
Oh, man.
And we thought, we had all this notification done and all this. Well, it worked out eventually. And we did find I think this guy had a sibling, I think, who we contacted. But again, there's where it's misinformation. We're told that this guy was a nephew, and everybody believed that it was. Now, he could have went ahead and said, okay, yes, I'll take responsibility, go ahead and release to this funeral home and take care of it and buried Uncle Dave, and the family never know. That could have happened.
Yeah, it could have. It very easily could have.
Because we don't
usually
require proof. How do you require proof? We don't require somebody to go get a genealogy study done.
A family tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Show me your family tree.
Yes.
Prove that you're the legal next of kin. Yeah. But and if I have to resort to doing a phone notification, I'll always ask the person that I call, and I won't identify myself right away as being from the coroner's office. I'll just say I'm an investigator with Summit County. Do you have a son or daughter or whoever named what the name of the decedent? And if they say yes, that is my son or my daughter or my aunt, uncle, whatever, then I'll go into telling them why I'm really calling and notify them of the death. But I have kind of a spiel down that I've kind of made up over time and kind of refined it so that it's not traumatizing to the person on the other end of the line, that I'm doing it in as compassionately as I can and yet get them notified in a timely manner.
Yes. And I think it's a great idea. I've done the same thing. I didn't realize that I did it this way or that even other people did it this way. But I'll do the same thing. I'll just simply state that I'm an investigator with Crawford County. I've been a police investigator for years, and so I'm just used to that. So I just say I'm an investigator with Crawford County, Missouri, and I need to talk to so and so. And again, I don't tell them coroner right off the bat, because whenever I give them a number to call, they call our dispatch center. Mm-hmm. And they don't even call the coroner's main line. So we purposely give them the dispatch because we have several investigators on call, and they route it around. So they don't really even know that they're calling the coroner's office. They just call dispatch and ask to talk to me by name or whatever, or whoever the investigator is. So we say that we're an investigator. I've had people say, I don't believe you. This is a scam call. And,
yep, I've had that a lot too.
And I've said, ma'am, look, it is not a scam call, but I understand completely that your need to verify. Can you do this for me? Will you do two things? Number one, Google Crawford County, Missouri coroner and find out if I've got the right name. And the phone number I'm going to give you is to our dispatch center. It should be on there. Call our dispatch center back on your own, and then ask for me. I mean, do your due diligence. I understand that, but unfortunately, I wish I was. I am not scamming you. This is true, but do what you got to do. I understand, but I do need to talk to you in a few minutes. And I've had them hang up and then call back. And when they call back, they have a totally different air about them because they realize, oh crap, this is real.
Oh yeah, this is real. And unfortunately, I've had cases where somebody died in the emergency room, and the doctor will. I don't know if they don't go through training on notifying next of kin, but even like yesterday, the guy that died in a skier death, he after he died, the doctor called the guy's mother and told him he died. She didn't believe him. She screamed and hung up on him twice. And but they just call and say, your son's dead. Yeah. And he was in an accident and he died. And it's like, okay, they need to go through some training on notifying next of kin, or let us do it, because we have been trained on how to do it. And we have experience on how to do it in a way that it is not as traumatizing to the next of kin.
Yes, very right. And again, I'd be careful here. It's not a shameless plug, but this is reality. We have an online course on our platform. It's an 8-hour course. Well, we have one that's like an hour and a half on proper death notification procedures. It's an hour and a half course. It's just about the basics of all these cautionaries and the proper way to do it. But there's another on there, professional death notifications. It's taught by a PhD. That's her name is Melissa. She teaches a class on professional death notifications, and in that class, she talks about how the medical community is not trained to do death notification, and why they do some of the things they do when it comes to death notifications, and how they should be doing it better. Because she speaks to medical personnel, emergency room, paramedics, coroners, police, and she talks about all kinds of things. It's a very interesting course. But she also says that nationally, death notifications by doctors and nurses in hospitals are done so incorrectly that it's known to cause extra trauma to the family because they don't know what they're doing.
Right. And that's surprising to me. I thought doctors had to go through some kind of training on doing death notifications, even in a hospital setting.
Maybe, but even the ones in my area, they don't do a very good job of it. They call on the phone and tell you. There are sometimes, if the family is there, then they bring them into a family room somewhere, and a doctor comes in and sits down with them and tells them. But that's if the family is there,
Right.
Still, when the doctor tells them, it's just very short. It's like they stick their head in the door and say, oh, yeah, hey, Bob's dead. Talk to the nurse. Now, not really that bad, but almost. They don't give them any information.
Right. And I even I have a friend that she experienced had a traumatic experience with when her father died in a hospital. He had been in the hospital for a while. She said the hospital never even called her and told her he died. And then when she showed up at the hospital, they said, yeah, your dad died and here's his belongings. And didn't even tell her where his body went, what the next steps were. She's like, I didn't know what to do. And she said that was extremely traumatic for her.
Yeah, that is ridiculous and crazy. And I've heard of similar stories. It's never happened in my county that I know of, but I've heard similar stories for sure. One last thing I want to talk about before we go, because we're really getting close on time, is we're talking about transient stuff. What about the homeless? I mean, chances of finding next of kin on the unhoused is now the proper term.
The unhoused.
Yes.
Okay.
The unhoused that are all over San Francisco, LA, and other places, whatever. But the unhoused are probably, we have a few little transient camps around, but it's wintertime in Missouri, and so they pretty well go somewhere else to keep warm. But some places are overran with homeless people, homeless society. How in the world do you find next of kin in that situation?
That can be tough. I mean, you try to make friends with, if they're in it like a transient community, like a little camp or something, try to make friends with the other transients that are there and see if they know anything about family or where they came from, that maybe they talked about where they had lived in the past. But yeah, that can be a challenge. And fortunately up here, we really don't have too many unhoused people up here. It's a little too cold and a little bit of a brutal environment for people to live up here, at least in the wintertime. We do get them in the summertime, but we haven't really had that much experience of having, or that problem of having to try to find next of kin for somebody that's transient.
But again, sometimes when they're in a transient community, they're not given their last name. Some of it's for security reasons, but if they do, it might be a false last name because maybe they've got a warrant somewhere, or maybe they're suffering PTSD, or drugs, or they've lost a grip on reality, or they're schizophrenic. Anything could happen, and they may not even be given the correct last name. And then the other issue is true. I would love to come to Colorado in the summertime. But come winter, I'm going somewhere else. And so now you've got even a bigger, it's not like you're homeless on the streets of LA for the last 10 years. You're LA, Colorado, Idaho, you bounce around wherever you can bounce around to. So that makes it even more difficult. And that's where these bigger cities have a lot of unclaimed bodies because they have no idea who to give them to. That's where you take a lot of pictures, you document tattoos, you make sure you have blood for DNA. If you don't run the full DNA profile, then at least you have a DNA blood card or something to be able to later on, and then just put it into an unknown database. There are some counties that have literally on their website is an unknown database that's got the person's face and tattoos and everything about them. If you know this person, contact us, because they just have so many unclaimed because there's no way to find a next of kin.
Right, and put them in NamUs as well.
Yes. And that's if they're reported missing. That's true, but some of these people aren't reported missing; they're just transient.
Right. Well, and like we had skeletal remains that were found up on the Colorado Trail, up on top of a mountain, and we can't identify them. I've had a skull reconstruction done, everything. We literally have a skeleton in our closet at the coroner's office, and we put him in NamUs, and I've tried to have the genealogy, forensic genetic genealogy done, and I still can't locate next of kin for this guy.
Yeah. And there are people out there like that's never been married, or married maybe, but no parents are alive. They've had no children. They've been transient or unhoused for years for whatever reason, and there's little to no records of them. They've never been in the military. They've never been, and when they die, and it's a sad thing, when they die, they've got no body. I mean, they're just die alone, basically.
Right.
And then they're left either cremated, buried, or put in your closet, whatever, because there's nothing we can do with them. And that's very sad. That's very sad. But it's a challenge to us to try to do the right thing to notify next of kin. But first, we have to identify them, and that's not always easy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
For sure. So, well, it's been a great conversation. Again, there's so much that this entails, and there's so many challenges. And I'm sure those of you that are listening have had challenges with trying to notify next of kin or even find out who a next of kin is. So, when that happens, then obviously you just do the best you can. Document. I think that's the biggest takeaway that I think I would leave. Do you agree, Wendy? Document what you do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Document documentation is going to save you in the end, and document everything to the nth degree, and that's going to help you. And I'd be interested to know what other jurisdictions do with this kind of a challenge as well, because we can't be the only ones who have this issue.
Right. And they can let us know on the website. Just click on the email or support tab and just email, hey, about your episode about, next of kin notification or transient. Just tell us something. If you don't want to be talked about in the show, we won't mention your name or whatever. But I would like to know it, whether we talk about it in the show or not. I'd like to know what some other people experience, maybe smaller rural areas even than us, and maybe even some big areas. Mm-hmm. What do you guys do in big areas? How do you handle it? What do you do? And then we can go over, if we get a few of those, we'll go over those on a show too and kind of talk about what other people do. So again, it's a big topic. It's a challenge for us that we have to deal with as a coroner, medical examiner side. That's what we deal with. The police don't. The police may help us, okay, but at the end, these bodies aren't stored in a police station. They're stored for us. And although they may help us try to track down next of kin or something with their resources, because a lot of times they have resources we may not have if you're a local county coroner that doesn't have access to some of these other databases. But at the end of the day, it is still the coroner or medical examiner's responsibility to do their best to notify next of kin. And yes, in a transient society like we live in today, it can be very, very difficult. But again, document. So with that said, listen, it's been a great episode. Really send us some feedback. I'd love to hear any feedback that you have. If you have an idea for a show, if you have an idea for something Wendy and I want to talk about, and you want us to talk about on the show, please let us know that. Again, remember, any type of training that we offer, if you want certain training, let us know. We'll try to provide that or create something new for you. Training in death investigation for coroners, medical examiners, police, and even other interested parties is what we do. And so we want to do everything we can to help you become a better investigator. So with that said, remember, you have to be a blessing to someone in your life, because certainly in the transient world that we live in, and sometimes we're going there even without the handbasket, we need some positive in our lives. So find somebody to smile at and say thank you, open the door, do something, find a way to be a blessing in someone's life, and it will come back to you tenfold, I promise you. And above all, we want you back next week, so be safe.
Thanks for listening to Coroner Talk, a DSPN media production.
Visit our website at coronertalk.com.
And be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/coroner training.
3617 1024 scene en route to morgue.